Buju, wago shindagu migizi indodem, gazaga squaji mekag, indun jaba. Today, I'd like to share a little bit about code switching. This word may mean different things to different people, but fundamentally, what code switching means is coming out of one environment with its cultural norms and expectations into another one. And all of us as human beings do some measure of code switching. Maybe we live in a house where everybody sits down at the table, there's no TV, and that's where you eat supper together. And someone else might have a house where everybody grabs their plate, sits in front of the TV, and they visit with one another while watching TV. So these are two different social environments. We code switch when we're used to doing it one way, and then we go somewhere else and we can acclimate to doing it their way. So a little bit of code switching is good. It's kind of how we get by and get along in the world. And in fact, when we do deeper code switching, maybe we learn another language or we visit another country, it can actually develop some musculature for more deeply understanding social, cultural, and even just basic emotional difference and difference in worldview and perspective and things like that. So code switching by itself can actually be really good. At the same time, if someone is from a marginalized group and let's say they're going to school in America, then they are being asked to code switch all day, every day. And it creates something a little bit different. So if you've traveled to a country where you did not speak the language and had the experience of like being kind of vigilant and not sure what's going on, and then finally, getting onto the plane and coming back into an American airport or whatever, and then, oh, now that sounds familiar, that smells familiar, and so forth. So one of the things that's difficult for people from marginalized groups is when we go out into the world and we're looking for who's in charge, we are usually looking at someone from a different group. So that could be the school teacher, superintendent, police officer, banker. And a certain amount of that we can accommodate. By the way, I consider myself a good code switcher. I'm good at whiteness. My academic English is on. Check out my office. Right? All of which says I'm good at the whiteness. Now, that doesn't tell you that I actually know anything or if I'm a decent person or not, but those sort of things where I work at a university help me get by and get along and be successful. So, one of the things that's difficult is that if you do a little bit of code switching, you're developing musculature and it's good for you. And if you're doing a lot of it, it's taxing and burdensome and stressful. It's like you're constantly walking around with this extra suit of armor on. And unfortunately, when we do things like run a school, we expect the students to do a lot of lifting. We have a set of cultural norms and expectations, and they are, for the most part, built around things like whiteness. And it is, first of all, difficult for the students from marginalized groups if they're being asked all the time to code switch. They're constantly in this state of vigilance. And it has a couple of effects. One is just the physiological stress and feeling like, oh, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that. I can't do this today. And so people will either show up angry, agitated, hyper aroused, or they will show up hypo aroused, zoned out, spaced out, and disengaged. And a lot of times the professionals are like, why is this happening? We are good people here. But what they're not realizing is that there's this burdensome expectation on the students to do this code switching. The other thing that happens for people from marginalized groups is that when you do a lot of code switching, becomes a tipping point where the code switching just becomes assimilation. And we start to think like, act like, believe like whatever's going on in the mainstream waters that we are swimming in. And that can create confusion, identity crisis, the desire to resist that experience. And all of that is just a lot of extra stuff for them to navigate. For white students, for example, for whom many of the cultural norms and expectations are common and familiar, we also do them a great disservice, because while we can only imagine what the world will look like in the future, we have to imagine that it will be a diverse place. And we are not preparing them for navigating diversity of culture, language, and other things, because the cultural norms and expectations are built around their normal. And so we both under-challenge our white students, and we overburden our students of color. And I think we can really do better by both if we just even this out a little bit. And we can do that in a number of ways. So one is just diversifying the team of who's teaching. There's a value to having both men and women on the team. There's a value to having good racial representation on the team. We all learn from each other, and we all bring our unique perspectives and experiences into the education. And then in addition to that, it's good to diversify the curriculum so that we all get to learn about ourselves as well as the rest of the world. And then beyond that, it's good to challenge ourselves to think about how we do the delivery of things like education. So instead of just written exams, how about ones that speak to people who are more auditory learners, or are more kinetic, where they benefit from getting up and doing things to internalize and display that they've learned something. So there are a lot of ways to exhibit knowledge, to do assessments. There are a lot of ways to go about doing the teaching. And so the tools that use maybe more collaborative educational approaches, different and diversified means and modalities of instruction, often will catch some of these students who don't respond as well to the kind of more linear educational approaches that have often been favored in our systems. So as we diversify the team, diversify the content, and diversify our approaches, we will actually do better for our white students, who will then get the right kinds of challenges to prepare them for the world. And we will do better by students from marginalized groups who can release one set of armor and not be overly burdened just by virtue of things like going to school or navigating society. So being attentive to code switching is going to be really helpful for all of us. Miigwech. Thanks for watching today. I'm Anton Treuer. Let's keep in touch. I'm active on social media, and my website has lots of information on my books, speaking engagements, resources for the Ojibwe language, teachers, and more. Miigwech.